You are on Saturday Magazine, Joy 94.9 with Macca and Bronnie. What I thought we'd do is the Liberation Conversation, as you know, is we pose a question to our guests and we let them go on a rant or justify their position. So what I thought we'd talk about today, because Bronwyn Pike is my co-host, but Bronnie is an ex-health minister, ex-education minister.
I've done it all.
Well-known serial happy clapper. So
I was.
So, but the role of religion in school, and I know that you had quite a strict Methodist upbringing.
I did, yeah, Macca. In fact, I reckon I'm the good woman gone bad here.
Yeah, I could agree with that. So, the good woman got better. And the whole issue of religion in schools, now, of course, in the United States, it is a huge issue.
Well, it's so significant, in fact, that people volley for positions on school councils so that they can use that as an opportunity to push their religious agenda.
But is, as a fellow traveller with the great... What's the term they call it in the Masons? The great conjugator? As a fellow traveller and as an education minister, how do you make happy bedfellows your belief, and being in education, in the ability of schools or the desire of schools to provide religious education? And I'm not talking here about independent schools.
We're talking about the government school system.
Talking about the state school system. So I could say I would have thought that you would have encouraged it, but I think I might be wrong. Yeah, well,
I probably would have years ago, but I've been on a bit of a journey in this area. So like you said, Macca, I grew up in a very religious household, and, my Sundays consisted of, spending virtually the whole day going to Sunday school and youth groups and all of those sorts of things. And in fact, I have worked for the church and, for many years was a church attender. I went to religious instruction at school when I was a school kid in the public system, and I know varying members of my family have even been volunteers in providing religious instruction. But over the years, my views really have changed a lot, and I actually am one of those now who believe that the churches should not have the right to provide religious instructions in government schools in the way that they currently do. That doesn't mean that things like comparative religion shouldn't be taught. I think that absolutely that people should understand the spiritual life and the significance of spirituality in people's lives, and learn about how that takes different forms and expressions in different places around the world. But Australia's a pluralistic society now, and even though I guess the first people who came here, except of course our Indigenous people, were people from England and, people of the Christian faith. That's not necessarily the makeup of our community anymore. And I don't think that any one group has a right to come into what is a free and secular public education system and, as of right, have the opportunity to promote their particular set of religious views. The other thing, quickly, I'll say, is that one of the things people are concerned about is that, we lose our kind of moral framework, or we lose our values, So you say, well, if these people aren't there teaching people reconciliation and kindness and love and generosity and, looking after poor people and all of those sort of things, then who is? But I think we just have to be a lot more creative and about the way we embed that in the kind of teaching and learning, and it does happen anyway.
I acknowledge that, but how do you? And it's a valid view, and I accept that. In fact, I'd embrace it. But how do you, for those that are, that have a very, very strong belief and that it does need to be part of school life, and that's what they believe.
Well, I think...
And that's what they're passionate about.
They are, yes.
And, that they want that to be provided in a school environment.
Yeah, well, a lot of gay and lesbian people would like to ensure that people in, in education understand the, complex and different relationships.
But you see, I would say, though, but being gay or lesbian is something you can't change, whereas religion is something you adopt.
Yes, yeah, and so I guess what I'm saying is that
religion is a choice.
It is. I mean, I think why I use the analogy. Of course, you're absolutely right. People can't change their sexuality, but a lot of people would feel that different kinds of relationships and that we have in our society are not fully understood and appreciated because we kind of only hammer the traditional male, female, and nuclear family kind of model as in our schools. But I guess, getting back to the whole religious thing, I think that one of the other difficulties is that the body who runs Christian education in our schools at the moment used to be much more representative of the mainstream religions, but now is overrepresented by the more conservative and evangelical sections of the church. And it's those groups that often have, I think, some of the most conservative...
The master franchises.
The master franchises. A number of them, I think, would say that they've been more influenced by some of the theology that's more inclusive, whereas the more conservative fundamentalist groups, I think, are now embracing, very discriminatory views, and therefore I think anything that promulgates those kinds of views in our society are wrong, and I'm very concerned that, recently we saw an incident down in Torquay where material was sent home with kids that was clearly incredibly conservative and discriminatory, very hurtful material, and I just don't think that has any place in our secular system. And look, really, if the churches believe that they have a message that is worthwhile, and then there are many opportunities in the rest of our community and society for them to express their faith. I mean, why don't they volunteer in schools? Why don't they come along and help in the working bees? There's an opportunities to help disadvantaged kids, get resources for school uniforms, to support families who are really struggling, to read to kids who've got literacy difficulties. There's lots of ways that you can express your Christian faith and show acts of caring and love to people in the government school system without needing to have half an hour a week to basically ram religion down people's throats.
I want you to hold that thought because we've actually got a couple of messages.
It's a controversial issue, isn't it? And I'm sure we're going to get lots of different views. It
says, if you want to educate kids in religion, go to a church or mosque or Sunday school. Church and state must be separate. Why do we want to change the Racial Vilification Act that further adds to this problem? Freedom agendas initiated by this government also contribute to homophobia. Okay. And Jim Hyde has said religion should be out of schools and replaced with voluntary ethics classes.
Why voluntary?
I'd actually make them compulsory, Jim.
Yes, I'm not sure why voluntary, Jim, because, I think ethics should be very much part of the core curriculum.
And he says, religion has no evidence base, and as a result, the promulgating of a set of beliefs relies on force. Ethics doesn't necessarily spring from religion or from an evolutionary religion, probably sprang from ethics, not vice versa.
What about storytelling, though? And I don't have any problem, with the use of the stories that are in the Bible, that are in other religious texts, and of course are in fables and very much part of our history, because they do they do impart really important ethical messages. They're about perseverance, about struggling for the right.
Yes.
And if you think of a lot of the stuff that's in the Bible, it is about, making sure that the poor are uplifted. It's about, making sure that we treat people with dignity and respect, all important values. But, of course, the churches don't have a monopoly on on those values at all. Other groups within community want to be able to share in those values and see that as a very important part of our society.
I mean, my mother, I wouldn't say she was strongly religious, but that wonderful high Church of England, sense of drama and ceremony.
She liked the whiffy stuff.
Oh yeah, and my father,
a bit of smoke and
my father
incense
said she was never righteous enough to be a Catholic. And I was
self-righteous.
And I was an altar boy, and I went to a church school, a boarding school. I've got to say, probably some of the principles that I learned have stuck with me. But I do agree with Jim that I'm a bit of an evidence-based person. So that's where I think that a school is not just a place to teach principles, but it is overwhelmingly a place to teach facts. The simple fact is that none of the religions, have an evidence base. Is that going to set you off?
No, not really. Well, I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I think as people, there are lots of things that we rely on to drive our behaviour that's not necessarily evidence-based. You can't always... you can't dismiss the kinds of stories and myths and legends that are part of the history of humankind that, in fact, have shaped, the values and the ways that we behave. And I think those things are really important not to be lost within a society. It's not, we can't, you can't always see love, but you can feel it and experience it. And it's a really important value. Although I think it's interesting, Mackie, you talked about, being in a religious school. And, I always struggle, with this whole issue of values and in some situations, because on the one hand, a lot of private education absolutely entrenches privilege.
Oh, totally.
It entrenches separation. Some people send their children to those schools because they don't want them to mix with the riffraff that's in the public system. That's not a Christian value.
No.
None of those are Christian values. What Christianity says is that everyone is equal, that in fact we have to bend over backwards to heal social divides.
But it was
and yet the very schools that say they are religious are by their very being entrenching un-Christian values. The
interesting thing, and we've got a message here, but I'll give this comment first. I went to it was a Church of England school. It was Trinity Grammar, the hedge burners. The interesting thing was that my mother, who was Church of England, my father, who was an excommunicated Catholic, but they
lapsed,
said...
they called
No, he was excommunicated.
He was excommunicated.
Yeah. That they said it's up to you whether you attend the religious instruction, and I said, oh, well, it sort of isn't compulsory, and my father said, "Oh, I don't think so."
Well, didn't you have to go to chapel though?
My father basically said to the headmaster, "Well, no, he's not going to chapel." He said, "Well, why are you sending him to a church school?" And he said, "Well, because the class sizes are smaller."
Well, in those days,
we got away with it.
Well, but in those days also, I think, a lot of people came out of their religious school experience with a lot of confusion, because the same people that were teaching them in chapel and singing hymns with them in the morning were the same group that were giving them the stick in the afternoon. Oh, yeah. And I think this has been one of the really difficult issues that people had to come to terms with the sexual abuse issues, is that here we have, people who are supposed to be...
Praise the Lord and pass the choir boy.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Are supposed to be the upholders of the most loving, compassionate message in the whole world, abusing people, and it's just so incongruous. And I think, that's why I think, the churches are in an extremely difficult position in our society, because for the first time in centuries, they've been toppled off the the throne in terms of being the upholders of moral right, and people recognising, hey, these guys are just human and they fail and do terrible things, and for them to then sort of say in a pious way that their value base is more important, and therefore somehow, in schools they have some sort of right to teach their values as distinct from, the teacher in the classroom who might be Islamic or have a non-religious background,
yes.
or they can't teach values. Well, hang on, guys, you don't have a monopoly on those things.
Right. Now we've got 3 SMSs here. Just to finish this off, one says, "Not that I'm religious, but the ram it down your throat. Wouldn't it be better to say to educate?" Yes. So we're not presenting a balanced point of view for us listeners to make our own mind up about. Okay.
What does that mean?
Jim from Elphington says, it's voluntary because no one has the right to force ideas onto others. You do that through equal opportunity legislation. And he says that his mother and your mother both went to the same oppressive church.
They did.
Another one here, elitism in schools is a great indicator of the greedy hypocrisy. Love your ideas.
I think we do need to say that, parents can opt out of religious education in our schools. That's one thing I want to say. Secondly, I think there are a lot of very loving and well-meaning people who volunteer to teach religious education in our schools now, and I don't want to denigrate them in any way. They are not. They're not everyone who are ramming ideas. They are about educating and they are about values. But I think as a broader principle in a pluralistic society, I think we do have to rethink the kind of privileged place that we've allowed the traditional religious education framework to have in our government school system. And we need to think that through really carefully to make sure that it's serving the kids in the best way it can.
And it's serving the community. And
absolutely.
One here, I wish Bronnie was heading the ALP Senate ticket in the WA election. And the last one, Mr Obama would never be a product of some of these schools. And he's now, I think he did have a religious upbringing.
Well, he was very influenced by the liberation theology movement, and he was a community activist who came out of the church environment, which I describe myself as too. I'm, someone who grew and learnt and was transformed by a lot of those radical ideas.